Greetings everyone and welcome to this lecture here. We are going to be talking about roles-based access controls, but really what does that truly mean? So for all of the lectures that we have here for this particular discussion, I'm going to go ahead and minimize myself here, because what we're going to actually look at here is first we're going to look at what are admin roles, of course, but what we're also going to look at are on-premise logic. So essentially the way that we used to do this, or we do this currently on-premise, how does it translate to the cloud? Well, let's give an idea here. Now I just pulled a couple of roles just literally right out of the air. Okay, so let's look at some of them. We have the enterprise administrator role. We saw that particular role there has the ability to manage the entirety of pretty much everything inside of it. That is the keys to the kingdom account. Very, very privileged account. We have domain admin, which again, another very privileged account, but not as much. So essentially we're looking at when we're looking at forest-wide changes, we're looking at the enterprise admin, but we're looking at domain admins, we're looking at domain level changes. Then we also have the schema admin. So again, just another group. This is a group that allows me to edit the schema. If I'm a member of enterprise admins, I can do essentially all of these, inherits all of them. That is as I said, keys to the kingdom account. So it's very important to make sure that we protect that account. Well, let's look at another one, the administrators group. So this isn't another role, but this is a computer side role or a device side role where the administrators themselves, if I am a member of that administrators group, I have local administrator access to computers inside of the domain. Again, privileged, very privileged. I can do a lot of when I'm a local administrator on a computer. Well, again, none of these have any bearing inside of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So there are many different ones. Let's look at these here. So in Microsoft 365, we have, I always call this the keys to the kingdom account here too. This is the global administrator. The global administrator has pretty much full access to everything, unadulterated access to everything inside of Office 365, with a couple of caveats to it, but we won't even touch those until we get to the compliance level stuff. We have the help desk administrator. This one allows us to reset passwords or manage user accounts, those types of things. Then we have service level administrators. Now, again, I'm just scratching the surface. We're going to look a bit further here as we dive into the lab for this particular section here. But we have service level administrators. We have Exchange admin, SharePoint admin, Teams admin. Every service itself has its own admin role on it. And really, why do we care about all of this stuff, to be completely frank? Well, Microsoft adheres to the principle of least privilege. And really what this means here is, in a nutshell, is give administrators only the permission levels that they absolutely require. The very bare minimum, okay? Again, to give you an example, I'm a SharePoint administrator. Why on earth would I give you the global administrator usage? That's the big piece of this here, is that I have so much other access to things. It's over-privileged accounts. That is probably one of the biggest and probably most important ways that we have discussions around these accounts, because there's so many different things that are available out there. And like I said, you'll see this when we get into the lab. But again, we want to give admins permission levels that they absolutely require. That's it. That's all they need, the bare minimum required. So let's look at some of these recommendations that Microsoft has. So again, using these RBAC, or the roles-based access controls, using these roles here, Microsoft has several recommendations as we go through here. One of the most important, and this is one that, gosh, almost every one of my customers fail, is no more than 4 global admin accounts. Now, it's not hard and draw a line in the sand of 4. The idea here is you would have global admin accounts that are necessary. I've had some customers who absolutely have necessary global admin accounts, but they have 5 or 6. Okay, that's not the end of the world. The idea here really is to kind of put it into perspective to say, hey, we are truly adhering to the principle of least privilege here, and these accounts they do need to have access to with a global administrator. Again, it has access to everything inside of the tenant, and as we go through these here, you'll really understand how powerful those global admin accounts are. Again, Microsoft also recommends the principle of least privilege. That's what I just told you here. Another one, strict multi-factor authentication requirements. We are going to set this up here in a lab during this section. We're going to set up multi-factor authentication, and we're going to set it up differently for privileged accounts. Now, the reason being here is the whole reason why we care about the principle of least privilege is we have to assume that these accounts will get compromised. And if they get compromised, then what's the worst that can happen with them? So again, if I'm a SharePoint administrator, my only actual role is to manage the SharePoint environment, and I was given the global admin, well, again, I can, laterally move to literally anything. I can go into Azure Active Directory. I can start messing around with these multi-factor authentication pieces. I can delete all of Exchange data. I can get really, really strict there. But if I'm adhering to the principle of least privilege here in this instance, and I'm a SharePoint admin, the worst that can happen is the SharePoint environment could be compromised. Now, that could be very detrimental as well, as we see when we get into the collaboration piece. But again, the idea here is, remember, we want to keep this as least privileged as possible. Here's another one, and I really cannot stress this enough. Audit frequently. We need to be able to run audits on who the heck has access to these things. Who has access to these accounts. There are services that we can use, and we will set this up, something called Privileged Identity Management, or PIM. We're going to set that up here in a little bit later of a lab on this section. But these are also ways of being able to understand who, and I always recommend to my customers once a month. It takes about 2 seconds. I'll show you exactly how you can do it. It's really not that hard. But again, auditing these things frequently is being able to say, so-and-so has access, this type of access. We can get more automated around this too. So here's the cool piece of Office 365, or just the Microsoft Cloud Stack as a whole, is if something doesn't exist, we can always create it. So this is one thing I work with my customers on around the idea of Power Automate, Flow, Apps, or even PowerShell. So again, we just looked at PowerShell in the very previous lab for about 5 seconds. It wasn't much, of course. But looking at the things that we can do inside of PowerShell is actually quite powerful, no pun intended there, but we can also run reports on that where essentially we have a task that runs, it runs a script and it exports or emails a report that says, here's the privileged accounts that you have in your environment this month. And then you look at it and you say, oh gosh, that person doesn't even work here anymore. And they still have access to their old previous stuff. Again, these are all things that we really, really want to look at and make sure that we adhere to correctly because, again, let me tell you, this can be a huge, huge problem for your organization if you do not manage it. I can't tell you how many times I've walked in and I've had customers all administrators in the organization have global admin. Not a good idea. Not a good idea at all. So with that, this is just a very short and sweet. A lot of these labs and lectures here as we go through this particular section, some may be longer, some may be shorter, but they're going to be short and sweet, but they're going to be succinct and to the point. So with that being said, for this particular lecture here, we're going to jump right into looking at the RBAC roles, what happens and how we can do it, and then do a little bit of auditing around it here too. So thanks for jumping on this one here, and I hope to see you on the next.